We talk Pierre Luc Dubois trade, the NHL draft, a busy offseason for the Kings, and more with Jesse Cohen of the All the Kings Men podcast on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and we're also on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the last 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 17 years, and of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are happy to be joined a day later than we had originally planned by a special friend of the show. You know him as the host of the official podcast of the Los Angeles Kings. That would be the All the Kings Men podcast. You also know him as the host of the Kings audio broadcast, pregame, postgame, in between periods, and of course, Kings Talk as well. He is Jesse Cohen. Hey, Jesse, how you doing?
Good, Eddie. How are you?
I'm a bit torn right now. I have a bit of a split personality as a hockey fan. I'm a Kings fan on one hand, but I'm an NHL fan on the other hand, and the Kings fan in me is rooting like crazy for the Oilers to lose. But the hockey fan in me is wanting a game 7. If only I could be assured somehow the Panthers would win that game 7, I would be very happy about that. But we'll see how it turns out. But I did ask this question on my show. I'll ask you this question: if the Oilers win the Stanley Cup, will you feel any differently about how the Kings were eliminated?
No,
that was a fast, quick no.
Absolutely not.
Well,
I was asked. So we talked about that on All the Kings Men. I was asked that question twice. The morning of exit interviews, there were people already anticipating, they're like, well, if it's a deep run, does it change your opinion? I said, no. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. I thought the Kings faced 3 opponents in their first round matchup. They faced the Edmonton Oilers, they faced the NHL officials, and they faced themselves. They clearly lost to the Edmonton Oilers. I would argue they clearly lost to the NHL refs, but more importantly than all of it, I feel like they lost to themselves. And the fact that the front office and the players all used some variation of the phrase disappointing says to me that they had higher expectations for themselves. I don't think you can be disappointed in yourself if you didn't perform below expectations. It doesn't change how I feel about it at all.
Yeah, for me, maybe a tiny bit, but then again, now you're thinking, oh, great, the Stanley Cup champions are in our division, so that's that maybe offsets any feelings I have about that. Yeah. So several topics to get into it with you. We were going to have you on Wednesday's show, but there was a bit of news that caused us to call an audible on that, and we'll get into that in a second. But it worked out well because we actually have some fun new stuff to talk about that came out today as well. Let's start with something personal for you. And I'm pleased to hear that it's not going to affect you in any way, but there is news that the LA Kings audio broadcasts are going back to terrestrial radio, and you're still going to be a part of those broadcasts as you have been in the past. So why don't you give us the details on that?
Yeah, so we're no longer partnered with iHeart. We're now partnered with ESPN LA, 710 AM. All 82 games will be available on the ESPN LA app. If you were listening on iHeart, you'll now have to listen on ESPN LA or the LA Kings app or the NHL app. Not all 82 games will be available on terrestrial radio in LA. Select games will be available on terrestrial radio on 710 ESPN. I want to say it's around 25 games. I don't know that is exactly how many games it will be, and there are still details being worked out. There's still probably more announcements to come in the ESPN 710 arena, as it were.
All right, so good news, and the format will still be the same. No
Yeah.
changes. Just where you get it is different.
Yeah, I think I said to somebody earlier today, it's, instead of going to Burger King, you'll go to Carl's Jr. to get your burger. But at the end of the day, you're getting Nick Nixon, Jim Fox, Darrell Evans, Zach Dooley, Carlin Bathe, me, anybody that's part of the simulcast. It should sound exactly the same. I know a lot of people were downloading. We made King's Talk available the following day as a downloadable podcast. A lot of people really enjoyed that. We'll continue to do that. It shouldn't change your experience other than where you go online to find it.
All right, so pretty much the same thing, just in a different place. So all good with that. I guess along those same lines, the Kings are changing their look, but it's sort of a version of an old look. But we did get a chance to see something that has been rumored, but it's now official. The Kings have changed their logo. No longer the, as some would call it, the home plate logo. If you're watching on YouTube wearing that hat, and I know it's been referred to as the Chevy logo, the logo that was changed when Wayne Gretzky came to LA. That was the logo and the uniforms that were being worn when I first became a Kings fan. So there's some certainly nostalgia for me as far as that goes as well. Maybe just talk a little bit about what you know about the decision to make that change and what you think about it.
Oh, I'm going to reveal that I'm wearing the old logo too because I moved my laptop. Yeah. Sorry. All right, I'm going to cover that up. So yeah, I know a lot about it. I just had an hour and 15-minute long podcast with Kelly Cheeseman, COO of the LA Kings, and two of the guys from House Industries, Andy Cruz and Jonathan Dupre. They were part of the team that created the new logo. It's a 2-year process, at least. You need to give the NHL 2 years notice for a change like this. And it is a refresh or a revamp of the 90s era logo. But the one thing that came out in all the conversations I've had publicly and behind the scenes is that there are so many applications and there's so many ways that a jersey needs to be used. And over the history of the LA Kings franchise, every time there was a change of logo, every time there was a change of approach, there wasn't a ton of thought put into how is this going to scale across different platforms. So if you made one logo, for example, the logo that you and I are both wearing, this one, it was originally designed just to be on a black jersey. They never gave any thought to what'll it look like on a white jersey because it was never intended to be the home and road primary jerseys. It was meant to be a third jersey. But then they made the playoffs. The players liked it. The team was starting to get good. And so they said, okay, well, let's make it on a white jersey. But then they had to add an outline for it to pop on a white jersey. But then when they did that, they didn't realize that if you put it on a piece of letterhead or on a mug or a tote bag or a baseball hat or whatever, it needs another. So there were like 3 or 4 revisions over the years of this logo. I think this one is the most recent and correct one. But the point is, like, if you're going to do a refresh, you need to start thinking about it more holistically. What is it going to look like on a black jersey and a white jersey? What's it going to look like on a mug, on a tote, on a piece of letterhead, on a business card, on a mouse pad, on a bar stool, in a neon sign in a bar, right? You actually have to think about all these things. So the original logo that the Kings wore when Wayne Gretzky joined the team, the font on that logo, for example, was not well thought out as far as size changes. So the Los Angeles was too thin. The Kings was too thick in some places, too thin in some places. So if you tried to shrink it, you tried to grow it, it wouldn't maintain that quality of image. The crown didn't have the detail would get lost depending on how big or small you wanted to make it. So whatever you think about the actual look of the logo, I happen to like it, but I've been staring at it now for a while. I was bound to like it no matter what it was. It was because listen, I don't like this logo particularly, but I got used to it.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. Like it just happens, right? Like you follow the team, you like the teams. That's what they wear. You don't have a choice. So you like it.
And it helps if they win 2 Stanley Cups while they're wearing it.
Yes,
too.
exactly.
Yeah.
Or there's some sort of, emotional nostalgic, right? Like I really didn't like the early 2000s jerseys that they wore with Halfie, Deadmarsh, and Allison. But then the frenzy on Figueroa happens. And now I forever am seeing, Adam Deadmarsh score on Chris Osgood in overtime and, running into the corner and getting mobbed by his teammates. Well, now I like that jersey. But the font, the logo, the crown, the whole thing, it was really clear in the conversations I've had that they really did put a ton of thought into it. And the phrase that I've been using at work a lot lately is I don't much care what the standards are for a project, but I need to know that there were standards. And this approach was all about creating consistency, standards, future proofing is a phrase that got used a lot. And I was concerned when I first heard that this was going to happen, because like I said, I haven't liked all the Kings logos in the past or all the Kings jerseys, frankly. And, things can always get worse. So when I heard that this was coming down the pike, I was a little nervous. I was like, oh man, I didn't really like the 2000s. I didn't really like the home plate. So like, am I going to like this? I have held the jerseys. I have seen the logo. I have seen all of it. I really like it. I really do. I am impressed with how much thought and work went into it.
Well, for full disclosure for me, I've always wished the Kings would go back to the Forum blue and gold and the crown logo. That said, this version of it, I'm a fan of it. I think it's an upgrade. I like it. And the general consensus I've seen, social media and talking to friends, they all like it as well. So a step in the positive direction, I would say, for the LA Kings. You mentioned the jersey. I got to ask, I don't know if there's a reveal, maybe at the draft, something you can, is it coming out soon as far as when we can get jerseys, when we can see the jerseys?
There will be a reveal. I don't know when it is.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure that I'm meant to say that I've seen and held.
Yeah.
Next week, at some point next week, there'll be some sort of, I don't think I'm spilling any secrets to say that before the draft, the NHL will reveal the Fanatics line for everybody. I hope I'm not saying anything I'm not supposed to, but
I don't think so.
But I was given custody of one of the jerseys for one night, and I've never been more nervous about anything in my life. But I know a lot of people are worried because of everything that happened with Major League Baseball and the jerseys and the fabric and everything. I don't think there's anything to worry about. And for anybody who knows me, I am constantly looking for things to be critical about, and I really don't have a lot. I really think I'm really positive on all of it. Having said all that, I thought Reverse Retro 2.0 was the greatest hockey jersey ever made in the history of hockey. So whatever that's worth.
All right. Well, that was the fun from today. We've got more fun to talk about from yesterday. We'll do that next here with Jesse Cohen from All the Kingsmen podcast here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I just purchased tickets recently to see my alma mater, Fresno State, play some college football at the Rose Bowl against UCLA this season, and I am a satisfied customer. The app is super easy to use and navigate. Just go on and tap on the listings, sports, music, shows, and they'll list the tickets with the best deals. And it is easy to search for tickets for teams or events. My favorite feature is the panoramic view. You can see exactly the view you're going to get from your seat before you buy it. And you also get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we continue with Jesse Cohen, who is your host on the Kings audio broadcast, post game, in between periods, and Kings talk afterwards as well. And of course, Jesse, the big news was the trade. Pierre Luc Dubois and the remaining 7 years on his contract that pays him $8.5 million per season to the Washington Capitals for veteran goalie Darcy Kemper. Straight up player for player deal. I know I just happened to be looking at my phone when the Elliot Friedman post came out, and then the subsequent Pierre LeBrun post, and my eyes were wide open when I saw that. How big of a surprise was this trade for you?
Well, so for weeks now, we've been preparing for the logo launch, and we've been joking that the night before the logo launch, Quinton Byfield would probably sign his extension, and it would totally overlap and blow out of the water anything about the logo, and it would give us all a bunch of extra work to have to do on top of all the work that had to be done. I was up this morning at 7 a.m. making sure that all of the tiny corner of the Kings world that I inhabit was ready for the switch over to the new logo and to get everything out on time and everything. So we were like, the Byfield extension will come and we'll all have a bunch more extra work and it'll be a nightmare and So yesterday was Juneteenth. Nobody was at the office, but there was a small handful of us that had to come in and handle some work, and I happened to be one of them. And I was planning on going home well before noon. I was planning on being out of the other. I was planning on coming in for a couple hours, taking care of some stuff, and then going right back home. And then I don't remember exactly when. It was perfectly clear that something was about to happen, but something was obviously about to happen. So I was at the office, and the first confirmation that I actually got was seeing that Elliot Friedman tweet, and that made it pretty clear what was happening. And then I'm still in shock, frankly. Yesterday was a crazy day. From yesterday at 9 a.m. to today at 10 a.m., 10:30 a.m. was a very crazy 24 or 26 hours, whatever you want to call it.
You mentioned something on your reaction podcast with Zach Dooley, the Kings insider. And I said the same thing on my podcast yesterday. It just feels like a weight has kind of been lifted, that it feels relief. And I know, look, clicks and all that 100%. Stuff. PLD was great for clicks, but I'm relieved. And I think Kings fans feel the same way, that it's not something that's going to be an issue going forward, or much less for the next 7 years. And it does feel like there's a weight off it. And now you've got the fun news from today, and it just things just feel a little bit better in the Kings world from the last couple of days.
I was so tired of talking about it. I mean, I think that's what you're alluding to at the end of the episode. I said, personally, I'm just happy to not have to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
During the first, 30 games when they went on that incredible road run, and it was every game that they won on the road. Okay, but is PLD contributing to should we be concerned, whatever? Then they went on the slump, and I was like, okay, is he not helping enough? And then they, fire Todd McClellan, bring Jim Hiller in, and then there's he's on the special report card, that they're judging him, and he's playing better, but is it good enough? And where is he going to be in the lineup? And who's going to be his line mate? And are they using him correctly? And should he be on the first? I don't have to talk about it anymore.
And then it transitioned into, are they going to buy him out? Are they not going to buy him out? Right. Yeah. So yes.
And now, so for all that, regardless of what one thinks about the final trade or the first trade or the year, the whatever, I'm just personally happy to never have to talk about it again.
I don't disagree with you. You mentioned Jim Hiller, and on a recent episode, you had him on. It was right after he was named the full-time coach. And my first reaction when I found out they were going to remove their interim tag, I can't say I was excited. As with most things with the Kings, whether I agree with it or not, I'm always hopeful. But I listened to the interview, and for people who haven't heard it, I encourage them to go check it out. Again, All the Kings Men podcast. He's so likable. And when you think about, we need to have change, things need to be different, is he a guy that's going to be able to do that? I find it very refreshing how open-minded he certainly seems to be. And, he's been in this for a long time, but he seems to have a pretty fresh approach to it. I feel encouraged about what he's going to be able to do and his identity. Now, he's never been a full-time NHL head coach before, so this is, in a sense, a new experience for him. But I just thought, and your conversation helped with that, to feel optimistic about him coming in with new ideas and things different and things changing for next year.
First off, I want to address the he's a nice guy thing, because I don't disagree. He's a very likable guy, and he's only ever been great with me. But the number of people that I have ever encountered in the world of professional sports that I would say, you know what, I didn't care for him. It's about 2.
I know one who was coaching the team when they won 2 Stanley Cups. So there's that.
Fair. I didn't never have to deal with him, but there's been one player. Yeah, basically one player and maybe some front office people where I was like, I don't particularly enjoy that.
I
everybody else
is, yes, I totally agree.
Everybody else is basically pretty nice, right?
Across the league, frankly, not just with the Kings.
Yeah, well, really. I mean, in life in general, right? If I talk to somebody and the best thing that somebody, saying, I'm going to introduce you to so and so, he's such a nice guy, that tells me nothing. Like it's pretty difficult to not be a nice guy, or gal, I suppose. So yes, Jim Miller has been great with us, and he is incredibly likable. As far as his free thinking ways, I wonder, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I wonder if the fact that he's never had to be a head coach has allowed him to hold on to some of those interesting approaches or philosophies. Because once you're a head coach and once your employment is determined by, strict wins and losses, we saw it last year. He gets named interim. He gets a mandate from Rob Blake. Wins and losses are the only thing that matter. Make the playoffs. And suddenly, we start seeing the 11-7, which was an interesting approach, right, that we hadn't seen previously. But all the decisions start coming down into a very narrow focus of like, we need to make the playoffs. How are we going to make the playoffs? We're going to make the playoffs by limiting goals against. How do we limit goals against? We limit chances against. And suddenly somebody who was brought in as a power play specialist with, offensive, creativity, suddenly, we're hearing about Jacques Lemaire and defensive responsibility and defense wins championships. And I agree with all of that. And with a full season under his belt, who knows, maybe we'll get both sides of the coin. But I wonder if he had 34 games last year, and they said you have to make the playoffs. Well, now he's got 82. But does anybody believe that the pressure is any more or less for him to make the playoffs? If he doesn't make the playoffs this year, does the organization say, it's okay. You had 82 games instead of 34, so it's fine. No, he has to he's got to make the playoffs. And when I say gotta, I don't mean that. Obviously, I suppose they could miss, but for everybody's sanity and for the direction of the LA Kings to progress moving forward, this has to be a playoff team this year.
How you feeling about a Darcy Kuemper, David Rittich combo in net for next season?
That's a real interesting question. I feel good about it because Pierre Luc Dubois is not amongst the forward core counting against the cap what he did. Somebody asked me, would I sign Darcy Kuemper to a 3-year, $5.25 million contract if he were an unrestricted free agent? And I said, probably not. But that's not what happened. The Kings traded for Darcy Kuemper, and they traded away Pierre Luc Dubois. And so with 3 years left at 5.25 and the career that Darcy Kuemper has had and the career that he's had when on good teams versus the career that he's had when on bad teams, I am perfectly comfortable entering the 2024-25 season with Darcy Kuemper on the roster as the presumed starter. Although Rob Blake made a really clear point, I thought, to refer to them as a tandem and talk about them as a tandem and not identify Kuemper as the starter and Rittich as the backup. So we'll see. Talbot played 55 games, I think, last year. And early on, they played him a lot. And not sure how much of that was the schedule, not sure how much of that was his performance, not sure how much of that was his familiarity with Todd McClellan. Darcy Kuemper is a former King, but it's not like he coached, it's not like he played here when Jim Miller was here. I don't think Newell Brown or DJ Smith have any extensive history with him. So I imagine he will probably play the majority of the games or the plurality of the games. But I'm curious to see whether or not it is a tandem or whether or not he is the starting goalie. But I mean, look, he won the Cup, which it's not nothing.
Agreed.
I don't know. I don't know what the actual value of it is, but it's definitely not nothing.
Yeah, for sure. We've got the NHL draft coming up for the LA Kings. We'll touch on that a little bit and more with Jesse Cohen of the All the Kings Men podcast. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Life is unpredictable. Just look at that trade we had the other day. But a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family quick and easy. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million in coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers with just a couple of clicks. Policygenius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. They have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. All right, more with Jesse Cohen from the All the Kings Men podcast, your official podcast of the LA Kings. We're just 8 days away from the start day one of the NHL entry draft. By the way, are you headed to Las Vegas? Do you get to go to the Sphere and check that out in person? Nice. Yeah. You had another interview that I highly recommend for Kings fans recently on the All the Kings Men podcast with longtime director of amateur scouting Mark Yannetti, who I believe is in like his 17th year or just had his 17th year, which I don't know how that ranks. Right. I don't know where that ranks amongst people in that position in the NHL, but I got to think he's one of the more tenured men doing that. But I thought it was a great interview, and to encourage people to go check it out, or maybe just to give people an idea about Mark Yannetti. He's a fascinating guy. I find the whole NHL draft fascinating because of the always changing parameters of it, how many picks you're going to have, where they're going to be, where are you picking in the draft, what kind of draft is it? I mean, it's constantly changing year to year, and you've got to move and change with it. But maybe just if you can, from your conversations with him, a bit of the philosophy that Mark Yannetti has and the Kings have when it comes to the NHL draft.
First of all, Mark is probably my favorite member of the LA Kings organization, because if you ask him a question, he will answer it.
Yeah.
And, a couple of years ago we had him on, and I asked him, I put a thing out to fans, go ahead, submit your questions for Mark Yannetti, and I'll ask him and we'll see what happens. And somebody said, what happened with Eric Chernak? And so I said, all right. And I asked Mark Yannetti, I said, what happened with Eric Chernak? And he said, I'll tell you, I don't care. And then he went and told us the whole story. I was like, all right, fine, great. So I love Mark. He probably says more than he ought to for his own sake. Full disclosure, I had to remove a couple things from that conversation because I was trying to protect him from himself.
That's good.
So he's great. But the real interesting part for me, and I think a lot of teams probably do this, but he was the first one that introduced this to me as a concept, was rather than trying to guess, how guys were ranked 1 through 200 and whatever, however many guys get taken in the draft now. I used to be able to do the math when it was just 30 players, but now that there's 32 teams, I can't. It's too complicated, but it's 200 and something. Rather than rank them 1 through 200, the Kings and I think a lot of other teams put players in tiers. So this year, Macklin Celebrini is obviously in a tier by himself. He'd be the clear, first overall pick. Then there might not be a ton of space between how good Macklin Celebrini is and then, 2 through 5. And then there might not be much space between, 6 through 15. But from Mark's perspective, I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth. Anybody you get in that tier is roughly as good as anybody else. And so you're not drafting with thoughts about position. You're not saying, okay, the Kings need a lefty, the Kings need a goalie, the Kings need a center. You're looking at these tiers. And then once you get the tiers created, you can say, okay, there's only one goalie in this tier. But in the past, when the Kings had Jonathan Quick, Mark said, the goalie goes to the bottom of that tier because they do have a Jonathan Quick, and they know that drafting a goalie in that scenario isn't going to be helpful to them. So at 21 overall, it's hard to know, obviously no team is going to reveal their draft strategy or their draft board. So it's hard to know where 21 falls in that tier system. It could be the top of one tier. It could be the bottom of another one. If there's a lot of players at the same position that exist in one tier and but not in the next one down, and they feel like if they don't grab a player there, they're not going to get another player later on. It's tough to, I'm not even going to try to hazard a guess at what they're going to do at 21. But Mark is definitely one of the most outspoken guys, like I said, and also and this is one thing I do actually think that he shares in common with Jim Hiller, and I really appreciate. Both of them are willing to, I think, investigate their own processes and admit when they're wrong, and adapt to, to lessons learned. And I value that personally, and I think it makes them more interesting and certainly to talk to as guests, but also I think it makes Mark good at his job. And I don't like the draft, but Mark makes it more interesting for me. So there you go.
Well, that is a conversation for another day.
Yeah,
I do. The Kings do have a first round pick. That's the first time they've had it in a couple of years. So it does feel like, hey, the party's going on and we're actually going to get invited this time.
Fingers crossed.
That's true. Real quick, though, if you don't mind me asking for a brief answer, Quinton Byfield, second overall pick in 2020, the biggest, pick the Kings have had in the recent drafts. What do you think about him moving to center this coming season? Do you think it'll happen? Would you like to see it happen?
I would like to see it happen. I do think it will happen. And I'm sorry to keep bringing up the subject that I said I didn't want to talk about anymore, but I think the Pierre Luc Dubois trade, first of all, I think it helps preserve the first round pick, because if the Kings were in the market for a high profile goalie, I think first round pick is on the table to trade away to get that goalie. So now you have a goalie, you don't have to worry about the pick. And Quinton Byfield having the season that he had last season, whether or not it proves that he's capable to play center, it certainly proves that he's capable of being a more dynamic forward. And he was drafted to be a center. And if, I don't know what his contract negotiation has looked like at all, I haven't heard anything about it, but if he was not willing to take a bridge deal, which I think would have benefited the organization from a short-term cap situation, and you could make an argument that it could have benefited him theoretically, right? If he signed a 2-year deal, the thought process being, well, I'll prove myself even more in these next 2 years. Then 2 years from now, when the cap has gone up even more, I can sign an even bigger contract, right? We saw Austin Matthews do that. So I don't know what his contract negotiation looks like, but if he was unwilling to entertain that thought process of a bridge deal, and if he wanted a longer contract at more money, then it makes sense to move pieces blocking him from doing that. And Quinton Byfield, a fully realized Quinton Byfield at center is a more valuable player than a fully realized Quinton Byfield at wing. Rob Blake alluded to the fact that they see him moving back to center. I think most people want to see it. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm looking forward to it.
That is Jesse Cohen. He is your pre and post game host for the Kings audio broadcast, Kings Talk as well. And of course, the All the Kingsmen podcast, your official podcast, the LA Kings. You can follow the show on X, Twitter at Kingsmen Podcast. Always a pleasure, Jesse. Thank you. And certainly hope to talk to you again before we get going next season.
Thanks, Eddie.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And you will hopefully enjoy tomorrow's show. It is our weekly Kings fan feedback show. I'm guessing there are some things you're going to have some feedback on. So we'll just leave it at that. If you want to send an email to get involved in that, it's lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube on the comment section. Stay interactive with the show on Twitter, X, Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Friday. And as always, go Kings, go.